Hi everyone. So yeah, my name's Esme Stallard. I'm a climate change and science reporter at BBC News, and I've been doing that for about coming on to nearly 2 years now. But how did I all start this? Well, I first did an international baccalaureate because I kind of liked lots of different sciences and maths and didn't really know what to do, but I don't think it's particularly important necessarily what you do to do the role that I do, but I think it helped certainly that I had done English to kind of A-level equivalent. And then I went on to do geology at Imperial, where I very much kind of was interested in sort of the climate aspects of geology, so looking at paleoclimatology, but at the same time, I kind of felt like I wanted to understand better how that applied in terms of helping to prepare for climate change. So after 3 years, I went and did a master's at UCL called Environment and Sustainable Development, which is quite a broad title, and it very much could sort of flex depending on what you were interested in. So I very much focused on how we could sort of adapt cities to climate change and policy around climate change, which I found really helpful in sort of contextualizing what I had learned already on the issue. And I kind of did some other kind of extracurricular stuff when I was there. For those of you that I guess are still at university, I guess the one thing I would say is take advantage of other modules or subjects that are kind of outside of what you do. So the benefit of doing a master's, certainly when I was at UCL, is that you could take electives in lots of different other subjects. So I just sort of just did ones that I thought was interesting and relevant to what I was wanting to follow on. So I did modules in looking at insurance modelling on the basis of climate data. I looked at climate finance. So these were all modules that weren't assessed, but I could just go to, and it just really helped them when I was applying for jobs, showing that I was interested in the kind of broader context of climate policy. And then I actually went and worked at Arup for 4.5 years, which is it's broadly a consultancy. It really varies. Most people will know it as an engineering consultancy. But I sat in the energy and climate change team. And my role here was, a lot of it was around climate emissions modelling. So I worked a lot with city governments and sometimes countries as well, in terms of helping them to get to their net zero objectives. So what that entailed was collecting a lot of different data from transport to energy, and understanding how their emissions could be reduced based on, I guess, their context. So as an example, I worked with the Los Angeles city, where very much there, even though they wanted to transition to public transport, the culture meant that it was a very car dependent city. And therefore we looked a lot at the uptake rate of electric vehicles and how that could be accelerated. So that was the more, I guess, technical modelling part, but also another big side of what we did was work on how we get that integrated into communities and make sure they were brought on board with what we were doing, and also what their perspective was on climate change. I guess I have some sort of images you can see here which show you the things that I worked on. So the one on the left is a sort of very simplified looking graph for Los Angeles, which was mapping out for them how their different sectors needed to reduce their emissions. But actually behind that was quite a complex model. So for those of you that are interested in it, we use something called Curb. I don't know if it's going to, I don't know if you can see beyond, or hopefully you should, but let me see if I can share my whole screen so you can see what I'm doing here. So let's do that. Okay, so you should now be able to see something called the Curb tool. So this is what actually was behind that very simplified graph that you saw in the programme. And what we have here is you put in a whole range of factors and data to kind of help to model a city's emissions. So as an example, you would put in their population, you would put in their background emissions, you would put in how many cars people drive. So it's a really kind of complex model behind it. And actually a lot of the job that I think it kind of is quite consistent in any role that I've done is there might be very technical work going on behind it, but actually a really important part of that is how you present your work and what you've done in a more simplified format for the audience. So that was that was working with LA. And then another part I mentioned there was actually working a lot with cities and helping their populations understand what we were doing. So another example of this is make sure I bring the right one up. So I worked with Surrey County Council a lot as well. I don't know if it's moving, yeah. And this is basically an interactive platform that we launched while I was working with Surrey. Basically, people could go on and select a particular element that we were talking about. So for example, we were looking at how we could help people retrofit their homes. So this was a proposed plan that we had, and people could just comment on it and give their views. And then we would decide if it was adopted. So it was a really important part of the work that we did, not just doing sort of technical modelling with what emissions should we reduce, but also actually looking at what this means for people. So that was my time at Arup, but actually I then basically joined BBC, and maybe what seems a bit of a left field move, but a lot of journalistic outlets are kind of looking for more experts in science that help their producers and their journalists to understand climate change, particularly as we get, I guess, more technical. So an example of that is when we get an IPCC report break. It's obviously a very, very long report, and how can journalists quickly understand it and know what to present to the audience in a factually correct way? Obviously, they can go external to experts like those that we've heard today, but actually BBC made a move a few years ago to kind of bring in more in-house expertise. So I joined the BBC as their first climate change researcher. And that was really helping the journalists on the ground to understand some of the more technical sides of climate change, both in terms of climate science, emissions and adaptation. And some of the stuff that I worked on, or that my team worked on, really varied. So we're a data-driven team, so we also worked on data-driven projects. So an example here, hopefully it should work, was this one here, which is me trying to get the Zoom thing out of the way. So this is one of the sites that we have in our team. So this is basically an interactive site for people around the world going to BBC and working out how warm their city is. So you can go down here and you can put in a city or a country name, for example. So let's put in the UK. We'll just choose one here. And it says that you can find your nearest city, and you choose one here. So this is Kharkiv, for example, and it will tell you how your temperature range will differ. So there's a lot of data behind this, and this is actually a lot of the work that the BBC does, is helping the audience understand through data. So I would say in the journalistic outfit, there are so many more roles becoming available for climate scientists and those with data backgrounds in helping people understand this, which is fantastic. And then I moved on from there as a researcher to then becoming a full-time reporter.
A delegates are meeting in Kenya.
So that's an example of a documentary that I worked on, helping with the research around mountain gorillas. I can send these slides afterwards so you can see them. But actually I moved on to then being a reporter. And what does that actually entail? Well, it really, really varies depending on what you want to do. So you can see here, there are a collection of different reports and stuff that I've worked on, and they really range. But I think something that's always underlying about all of these is that they have a data angle to them. And that's something that I brought from my background. So I'd say if journalism is something you want to get into, don't worry that you haven't done English or journalism. Actually, journalism is crying out for people that have technical know-how and therefore can understand news stories. So for example, this Forever Chemicals one, those of you might have heard PFAS, it kind of was behind that famous film Dark Water in America, but it's basically a very big issue at the moment. And what I did is I spent months going through the ingredient list of different makeups to identify PFAS. So that's one example. This example here on flaring emissions is I spent probably 9 months going through the records of different oil companies to identify their different assets and work out what emissions they were declaring. And I knew that scope 3 emissions so in this case, for sites where they owned but didn't operate them, weren't being declared. And that was from my knowledge working at Arup. So from that, I was able to identify stories. So I guess this is just showing like there's a niche for everyone in terms of getting into this. I've also got the one on the right there, which is animal tests for makeup. The reason I included that is that actually was a complete nightmare story to work on. I think it's just, I kind of included as an example that really early on in your career, you're always learning, you're going to make mistakes, and that's completely fine. So for this one, it wasn't so much a mistake. This was a really big case that came about, revealing that the UK was issuing licenses for animal testing. And basically I reported on it, and there was a massive backlash. So I got complaints in the animal testing industry, I got complaints in the cosmetic industry, and there was nothing factually incorrect in that. But you'll see that it says animal test and makeup allowed. Initially, the headline was animal testing continues after 25-year ban, but they complained that it was too it wasn't nuanced enough for what the story was, so we had to edit the headline. And I also got a complaint from the Prime Minister's office about that. So it was quite a scary time, and it's not necessarily always easy, but actually what ended up from this is actually the government a few weeks ago banned all licenses. So it's just to say that you're always learning in this job, and it makes it really interesting. Kind of don't want to take up any more time, so I'm just going to show you some photos of me on the job, I guess. So the one on the left is me looking very unamused because I had been in the office for about 14 hours at this point. So that's kind of the other side of journalism, is that it can be very intense when you have to cover a story, but it is also really exciting. So you get out a lot. So the one in the middle is from a protest on Dartmoor around wild camping that we went along to. And then the one on the right is about grid connection issues. So that's a new solar farm being built and how it's going to connect into this substation. And then the other great thing about being a climate scientist is obviously you get to travel abroad. So the sort of photo on the top and on the left is me at COP27 last year in Egypt, reporting from that. So the output is really different and varied. So you get kind of podcasts, radio, TV, a real range, which is really exciting, and you're always learning on the job. And I think something I found probably most challenging coming from an academic background is kind of going from the very, very detailed to kind of, I guess, simpler. But actually that's something that you can learn on the way. And I would just say it's a real asset being a scientist in this role. And don't let that put you off if this is something you want to go into that you haven't done journalism or anything. Sorry, I don't want to carry on rambling too much, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour about what I work on and how I got to the point where I got to.